This week, the Trump administration ordered the release of thousands of files related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. The Kennedy assassination has long been the subject of scrutiny and theorizing, with many researchers raising concerns about a potential CIA connection to Kennedy's death. Indeed, allegations of CIA involvement emerged quickly after Kennedy's death, and became a subject of interest in the primary investigative effort, known as the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission was formed just 1 week after the assassination and disbanded after less than a year of investigating. The commission, which included among its members former CIA Director Allen Dulles, came to the conclusion that Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, and that Oswald acted alone. Further, the commission concluded that Jack Ruby, who shot Oswald dead 2 days after Kennedy's assassination, also acted alone and on his own personal directive. Many have remained unsatisfied with the Warren Commission's efforts and have demanded complete disclosure of the records they reviewed to reach their conclusions. In 2014, CIA Chief Historian David Robarge authored a report concluding John McCone, who was the CIA director at the time of the Kennedy assassination and the Warren Commission investigation, was complicit in a, quote, benign cover-up, unquote, by withholding documents sought by the Warren Commission. Robarge concluded McCone wanted the commission to remain focused on what he deemed the, quote, best truth, unquote, that Oswald acted alone. Many of the files in this week's document disclosure remain blurry and barely legible. Many of these documents have previously been released, but with redactions, and no clear smoking gun has emerged to reverse the Warren Commission's conclusions, no matter how skeptical the public remains of that initial investigation. That said, these new documents provide important context about the CIA's activities in the years surrounding the Kennedy assassination, including concerns within the Kennedy White House about the activities of the CIA and about the agency's prior awareness of Oswald. So, here are 5 things we now better understand about the CIA thanks to these new disclosures. First off, we know the CIA had a program for recruiting Soviet sympathizers through their mail. Among the new disclosures, we now have more details about a CIA program to inspect mail being sent from the United States to what was then the Soviet Union. Previous JFK file disclosures have revealed that the CIA had devoted resources to inspecting mail between the United States and the Soviet Union, but a new document reveals the extent of the program. An FBI internal memo shared in the winter of 1958 reveals the Bureau was aware of a CIA program that began at least a year and a half prior to search mail headed to the Soviet Union on the grounds that Soviet secret agents around the world would use the Postal Service to coordinate with their handlers. The document reveals between 200 and 300 CIA employees had been assigned to this mail inspection program at an approximate annual cost of $1 million a year in 1958 dollars, the equivalent of about $10 million today. The FBI memo states that one of the objectives of this program was to identify individuals that the CIA could flip to become intelligence sources. James Angleton, the head of the CIA's counterintelligence program at the time, revealed to the FBI that the CIA had, quote, successfully developed several sources through this means, unquote. This revelation is critical as it relates to Oswald. A former U.S. Marine, Oswald defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, only to return to the United States in June of 1962, about a year and a half before the Kennedy assassination. Robarge alluded to the CIA mail inspection program in his 2014 report, noting the CIA had, quote, acquired information from Oswald, unquote, prior to the assassination. Robarge had raised the possibility that CIA employees hid this detail about the mail inspection program from CIA Director McCone. Robarge also raised the possibility that McCone knew about the mail inspection program, but elected to conceal it so as to protect a highly secretive effort to recruit double agents. Robarge's report also states McCone may have also concluded that if there was no sign from Oswald's mail indicating that he was a threat to the president, then the Warren Commission didn't need to know about the CIA's mail inspection program. It bears noting that Allen Dulles, who was on the Warren Commission, had been in charge of the CIA until 1961, covering the span of time in which the CIA's mail sorting program was active. The existence of a CIA program to inspect mail to the Soviet Union in hopes of finding intelligence assets raises the possibility that Oswald could have been among the individuals that the CIA had recruited. Margaret Oswald, the mother of Lee Harvey Oswald, had alleged her son was indeed a CIA agent. She shared this suspicion with the Warren Commission in February of 1964. Number 2, we learn that the CIA had extensive networks of agents pretending to be regular employees of U.S. embassies and consulates around the world. This week's JFK disclosures provide new context about concerns raised within the Kennedy White House that the CIA was increasingly acting without oversight and possibly at odds with official U.S. policy. These concerns about the CIA arose after a failed operation to overthrow the Cuban government of Fidel Castro in April of 1961, often referred to as the Bay of Pigs invasion. In June of 1961, Kennedy White House aide Arthur Schlesinger Jr. authored a classified memo titled CIA Reorganization. Throughout the memo, which was classified at the secret level, Schlesinger warned that the CIA was operating with increasing autonomy, lacking appropriate supervision and safeguards to ensure their covert operations were properly aligned with the official policies of the United States. At one point in his memo, Schlesinger said the agency had the makings of a, quote, state within a state, unquote. Schlesinger's memo was previously released, but with redactions. The latest round of disclosures now allows the public to view behind these redactions. With this new look, the public can now see that Schlesinger reported that some 47% of political officers serving in U.S. embassies were controlled American sources, CAS, a euphemism for intelligence agents pretending to be diplomats. Schlesinger warned that CIA station chiefs in certain countries often had more influence over embassy staffs within those countries than actual U.S. ambassadors, and would sometimes pursue different policies. In the aftermath of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, Schlesinger concluded that the CIA has had an outsized influence in directing covert political operations without the necessary input of the State Department until the late planning stages. Schlesinger wrote that by the time the State Department became aware of the Bay of Pigs plan, it was under significant pressure to endorse the operation. Schlesinger further noted the significant portion of State Department employees who are actually undercover CIA assets as a further example of how the intelligence agency had subverted the department's diplomatic responsibilities and undermined their ability to understand and make recommendations on foreign policy actions. Kennedy publicly accepted responsibility for the U.S. role in the failed Bay of Pigs operation, but still considered opportunities to assassinate Castro and overthrow his government thereafter. These continued anti-Castro plans were led by the CIA and dubbed Operation Mongoose. After the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, in which the Soviet Union threatened to deploy nuclear-armed missiles on Cuba, Kennedy reduced the size and scope of Operation Mongoose and made some efforts to repair relations with Cuba. In a 1979 report, the U.S. House Select Committee on Assassinations discussed the possibility that CIA-connected anti-Castro factions felt Kennedy had left them hanging without proper U.S. support during the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, and were embittered by this, and by the appearance of Kennedy backing away from efforts to remove Castro. The committee studied the possibility that some of these CIA-linked anti-Castro groups played a role in the Kennedy assassination. They found no specific evidence to support this theory, but also didn't preclude the possibility of a plot by anti-Castro actors to kill Kennedy. Number 3. Another look at the CIA family jewels, the break-in at the French consulate, and KGB tactics in the United States. Included among the latest disclosures is a more complete picture of a range of the CIA's most controversial actions. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh was among the first to become aware of these operations in 1974, publishing articles that revealed what he described as the CIA's family jewels. William Colby, the director of the CIA from 1973 to 1976, described these operations as, quote, skeletons in the CIA's closet, unquote. Previously disclosed portions of the family jewels files revealed CIA operations to wiretap and surveil American journalists and political dissidents within the United States, including anti-war activists. Also previously revealed were break-ins at the homes of Americans, including CIA employees. Another famed jewel in these past disclosures was Project MKUltra, in which the CIA studied ways to interrogate, brainwash, and psychologically torture people through the use of powerful psychoactive compounds, such as LSD. While those actions were previously known, this week's disclosures reveal a new document related to the family jewels. The new document, which was prepared for Colby in 1973, describes CIA activities that officials believed had exceeded the agency's charter. The memo describes a CIA operation to break into and abscond with sensitive documents from a French consulate in the United States in April of 1963. The document notes CIA Director McCone briefed President Kennedy. The president's brother, then Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, was also briefed on the break-in. An apparent objective of the break-in at the French consulate was to gather information on espionage activities in the United States by the French. Dean Rusk, who was the Secretary of State at the time, expressed misgivings about the break-in and urged the Kennedy administration to inform the French that their spying activities were discovered and should desist. At another point, the memo states the FBI had tipped off the president's Intelligence Advisory Board that the CIA was, quote, planning to wiretap extensively and indiscriminately in this country to greatly increase the agency's representation in the Moscow embassy and generally to use KGB-type tactics, also extensively and indiscriminately, unquote. This tip-off by the FBI to President Kennedy led to a, quote, heated exchange, unquote, between CIA Director McCone and FBI Assistant Director Alan Belmont. The memo also describes plans that were discussed, but perhaps not carried out, to use chemical warfare agents against crops in Cuba and Vietnam. Another proposal to sabotage a nuclear installation of the Communist Chinese government, and plans to greatly increase intelligence gathering efforts targeted at embassies of foreign governments within the United States. Number 4. Plans for biological warfare against Cuba. While the previously mentioned 1972 Family Jewels memo touched on proposals for the use of chemical warfare agents in Cuba and Vietnam, other documents contained in this latest round of disclosures also describes planning for biological warfare operations. A 1962 memo, prepared as part of Operation Mongoose, reveals discussions about the best way to surreptitiously induce crop failure in Cuba to undermine the Castro government. The document appears to reveal a preference for biological agents that appear to be natural in origin, rather than chemical agents that might be recognized as a deliberate sabotage effort. The memo states that one official who was involved in these discussions, quote, had no worries about any such sabotage, which could clearly be made to appear as the result of local Cuban disaffection or of a natural disaster, but that we must avoid external activities such as release of chemicals, etc., unless they could be completely covered up, unquote. And finally, number 5. CIA operations shaping Western Hemisphere governments, including through election rigging and assassination. The new disclosures also reveal efforts by the CIA to pick who will lead countries in Central and South America and the Caribbean, and to remove people they didn't like. The CIA's regime change operations in the Western Hemisphere were not confined to just destabilizing the Castro government in Cuba. A 1973 document included in these latest disclosures describes how the CIA supported Bolivian General René Barrientos in his bid for the Bolivian presidency. Barrientos had been the vice president of Bolivia until November of 1964, when he co-led a coup to overthrow the president at the time, Victor Paz Estensoro. Barrientos remained the leader of a military government in Bolivia from November of 1964 until August of 1966, after which he was elected as a constitutional president through a national election. According to the 1973 CIA document, Barrientos had backing from the U.S. government in his 1966 election bid. The CIA spent $585,000 in 1964 dollars, the equivalent of about $6 million today, to convince Bolivia's military government to hold constitutional elections, to suppress leftists in the process, keep other political actors out of the way, and to make the election appear legitimate. The document states, quote, "To have Barrientos elected, CIA first had to promote a credible election by underwriting the campaigns of both the selected winner and his token opposition at the polls," unquote. Revealing just how predetermined the outcome of the 1966 Bolivian election was, the CIA document states, quote, "In a genuine tour de force, CIA Chief of Station Lawrence M. Sternfield produced what Organization of American States observers called a democratic and honest election, and got the results from the Electoral Tribunal 4 days before the election," unquote. But not every leadership outcome was set through a rigged election. Sometimes existing leaders first had to be eliminated. On May 30th, 1961, Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, was killed in an ambush on a lonely stretch of highway in what is today the capital city, Santo Domingo. Following Trujillo's assassination, the U.S. government took efforts to influence the country's future governance. Beyond that, people have been left to debate the degree to which the U.S. government also had a hand in the assassination itself. In a 1975 report to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, CIA officials admitted the agency had plotted the assassinations of Castro, Trujillo, and the former president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. The memo goes on to state that the CIA had, quote, "no role whatsoever," unquote, in Lumumba's assassination in January of 1961. As for Trujillo, the memo stated the agency played no active part in the killing, but had a faint connection with those who did do the shooting. Following a 2011 interview with one of Trujillo's alleged assassins, the BBC reported U.S. involvement in his assassination amounted to, quote, M1 carbines left in the U.S. consulate after the withdrawal of embassy staff and handed over with CIA approval, unquote. Though earlier disclosures downplayed the U.S. role in Trujillo's 1961 assassination, a newly released document suggests a greater degree of CIA involvement and even names specific agency employees connected to the killing. This newly released CIA memo, which is dated to sometime in or around 1967, specifically identifies 12 U.S. government officers involved in the plot, including 6 CIA officers and 6 State Department employees who routinely communicated through CIA channels. Rather than simply passing along 3 rifles one day, the document indicates the CIA actually took many proactive steps to arrange the transfer of these guns for months, and finally did so by recruiting an intermediary, an American who owned a grocery store in the country named Lorenzo Berry. The 64-page CIA document details discussions of efforts to convince Trujillo to step down on his own, as well as options to smuggle weapons into the country to assassinate him. The document then reveals extensive conversations about what weapons would be best to transfer to the assassins. While the killers did eventually receive the 3 M1 carbines described by the BBC, the plotters discussed transfers of high-powered sniper rifles, submachine guns, rocket launchers, and grenades. The discussions about the transfer of weapons proceeded up to the last few days before the assassination. The CIA said machine guns would be supplied to demonstrate goodwill with the assassins, and steps were taken to achieve this goal. But the memo states they never did go through with passing along any weapons other than those M1 carbines. The CIA had transferred the M1 carbines just days before the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, and the internal memo indicates the high-profile failure in Cuba influenced their decision not to provide more weapons to their Dominican contacts involved in the Trujillo assassination plot. Rather than a faint connection to the killing, this CIA record instead indicates the agency was closely involved in the planning even after the Bay of Pigs failure, but limited their support thereafter as a way to maintain a low profile. In a message sent the day after Trujillo's assassination, the CIA's Dominican Republic Chief of Station, Robert Owens, states, quote, "If we are to at least try cover-up tracks, CIA personnel directly involved in assassination preparations must be withdrawn now. If assassination tried and not successful, immediate evacuation of the Chief of Station, the operations officer, and the administrative assistant mandatory," unquote. Indeed, by June 2nd, Owen and 2 other CIA officers in the Dominican Republic, who were identified as plotters, left the country. Some of the Dominicans involved in the assassination plot were arrested and interrogated, and proceeded to tell of a high-level U.S. government role in the planning. Dominican authorities actually didn't believe these confessions by the assassins because they presumed that if the U.S. government was involved, the plan would have seen not only Trujillo's successful assassination, but the complete overthrow of his government. Indeed, the overthrow of Trujillo's government was discussed by the CIA, but they assessed after the fact that their Dominican co-conspirators were too fragmented and failed to coordinate among themselves the general government coup that would follow Trujillo's assassination. Lorenzo Berry, the store owner who facilitated the weapons transfers to the assassins, would later return to the United States and receive $2,000 in compensation for his efforts by the CIA. So while the new JFK documents disclosures don't necessarily change the Warren Commission's conclusions, they do provide many insights about the true nature of CIA operations during that era. These new documents underline the CIA's already established connections to Oswald, the Kennedy administration's concerns about CIA oversight, and the agency's methods for overthrowing governments, assassinating political leaders, and implementing regime changes. Are there more secrets yet to be revealed about the Kennedy assassination? Did Oswald act alone, or did he have accomplices? Is it possible that Oswald was completely innocent and was made to be a fall guy? If you've watched this far, consider subscribing and leave a comment letting me know what you think.